Imagine you finally have everything you were told would make you whole. The career is stable, the rent is paid, and your social circle is exactly where it needs to be. On paper, you have won the game of modern survival. But then, in the quiet of a Tuesday night, a strange, heavy question sits at the foot of your bed. Is this actually it? It's not sadness, and it's certainly not a crisis. It is a dull, persistent ache, the feeling of a ghost limb for a life you haven't lived yet. You're safe, you're fed, and you're liked. Yet, you feel like a high-performance engine idling in a school zone. You have hit the invisible ceiling of normal. And this is exactly where Abraham Maslow begins his most radical work. He realized that being not sick isn't the same thing as being truly alive. Most of us spend our entire lives fixing what is wrong, never stopping to ask what could be right. We are masters of survival, but we are amateurs at existing. Today, we're looking at the brutal truth of why you feel unfinished and how to finally break through that ceiling. Most people think of Maslow's work as a simple to-do list for happiness. We see a colorful triangle in a textbook and assume we just need to check the boxes. First, you find food and water. Then you find a house and a job. Next, you find a partner, and then you feel good about yourself. Finally, at the very top, you magically reach this thing called self-actualization. But Maslow never actually drew a pyramid. A consultant added that later. In the original theory, these layers are more like a set of biological radio frequencies. If your safety signal is static heavy, it drowns out your growth signal. Think of it as a prepotency of needs. You cannot focus on your soul's purpose if your nervous system is screaming about a bill. But here is the brutal truth. Most of us get stuck in the middle layers. We become professional survivors, addicted to the hit of social validation. We mistake being liked for being fulfilled. Self-actualization isn't a trophy you win at the end of the race. It is a psychological shift from what do I need to what am I capable of. It is the transition from biological necessity to psychological freedom. I once knew a man who spent 15 years climbing a very specific mountain. He wanted the corner office, the precise model of German sedan, and the perfect zip code. He believed that actualization was just a synonym for acquisition. The day he finally sat in that leather chair, he looked out at the city's skyline. He expected to feel a surge of electricity, a sense of arrival. Instead, he felt a terrifying, hollow silence. He had spent a decade silencing his own curiosity to pay for a life he didn't even like. He realized he had become a world-class architect of a building he didn't want to live in. His safety was ironclad, and his esteem was validated by every person he met. But his self was a stranger he hadn't spoken to since he was 19. He told me, I have everything I ever wanted, and I've never felt more like a fraud. This is the success paradox that Maslow warned us about. When you win the game of survival, the real work finally begins. And for most of us, that's the scariest part of the journey. Because now, there are no more excuses left to hide behind. To understand why that hollow feeling exists, we have to look at Maslow's core distinction. He divided our needs into two psychological categories: D needs and B needs. D needs stand for deficiency needs. These are things like hunger, safety, belonging, and even basic self-esteem. They function like a biological thermostat. When you lack them, you feel a tension, a deficit that demands to be filled. But once you eat, the hunger disappears. Once you are safe, the anxiety fades. The trap is that many of us treat our entire lives as a series of deficiencies. We think, if I just get that promotion, the hole in my chest will close. But self-actualization is a B need, which stands for being. B needs do not disappear when you engage with them. They actually expand. The more you learn, the more you want to understand. The more you create, the more creative energy you feel. Deficiency needs are about survival. Being needs are about growth. You cannot fill the need for self-actualization by consuming things. You can only satisfy it by becoming something. If you're treating your soul like a hunger that can be fed with money, you will always be starving. Every morning, you wake up at a psychological crossroads. One path leads back toward the familiar, the safety you've already built. The other path leads toward the growth you haven't yet realized. Maslow believed that we are constantly choosing between these two directions. Growth is often a series of tiny, uncomfortable decisions. It's the decision to speak your truth when it's easier to stay silent. It's the choice to try a new skill where you know you will look like a fool. Safety feels warm, predictable, and incredibly seductive. But if you choose safety every single time, you pay a hidden tax. That tax is a slow, creeping resentment toward your own life. You aren't failing. You are simply static. You are a seed that refuses to sprout because the soil feels too dark. The tragedy isn't that we aren't successful by the world's standards. The tragedy is that we're choosing to stay small to avoid being judged. We trade our potential for the comfort of being understood, and every time we do, the self we could have been grows a little quieter. Maslow didn't just guess what a perfect person looks like. He studied the healthiest 1% of the population, people like Einstein and Eleanor Roosevelt. He found that self-actualized people aren't perfect, they're integrated. One of the core traits he identified was superior perception of reality. They see things as they are, not as they wish them to be. They aren't easily fooled by social masks or popular delusions. Another vital trait is spontaneity. They are ethically grounded, but they don't follow rules just for the sake of it. They are comfortable in their own skin, which makes them oddly private. Maslow also noted a trait called problem centering. Most people are ego-centered, meaning they see every event as it relates to them. Actualized people focus on a mission outside of themselves. They aren't fixing their lives, they are serving a purpose. They have a democratic character structure, meaning they learn from anyone. Whether you're a CEO or a janitor, they see the human, not the rank. These aren't superpowers. They are the natural state of a human who has stopped being afraid. If self-actualization is our natural state, why is it so rare? Why do we look at people who are living their truth with a mix of awe and deep irritation? It is because their growth highlights our own stagnation. Becoming who you are is a lonely, terrifying act of defiance. To grow, you have to be willing to lose the approval of people who only like the safe version of you. You have to be willing to be the idiot in the room while you learn a new language or start a business. We are terrified of our own light because light requires responsibility. If you admit you have a massive potential, you can no longer blame your circumstances for your unhappiness. It is much easier to stay in the waiting room of life, complaining about the wait. We hide in our habits and our Netflix queues because they are predictable. We are afraid that if we actually tried, we might fail. Or worse, we might succeed. And if we succeed, everything we know about ourselves will have to change. The self you are protecting is often just a collection of your own fears. Maslow coined a specific term for this fear, the Jonah Complex. It is named after the biblical figure who tried to run away from his destiny. It is the evasion of one's own growth or the running away from one's best talents. In psychology, this is a defense mechanism against the arrogance of greatness. We feel that to be truly great is to be abnormal or conceited. We have been conditioned to believe that fitting in is the highest form of safety. The Jonah Complex shows up as a physical resistance to your own ideas. It's that heavy feeling in your chest when you think about publishing that article or taking that leap. It's your brain's way of saying, don't stand out. It's dangerous out there. But Maslow argued that by avoiding your own potential, you create a deep internal sickness. He called it metapathology, a spiritual or psychological malaise. When you have the capacity to create, but you choose to consume, you become metapathologically ill. You feel cynical, bored, and empty because you are a high-performance machine running on low-grade fuel. Have you ever had a moment where the rest of the world just disappeared? Maybe you were lost in a piece of music or standing on top of a mountain at dawn. For a few seconds, that ego, that little voice in your head that worries about the bills, went silent. You weren't thinking about the sunset, you were part of the sunset. Maslow called these peak experiences. They are those rare, luminous flashes of what it feels like to be fully human. In these moments, you aren't trying to get anywhere or become anyone. You have already arrived. For the self-actualized person, these moments aren't just lucky accidents. They are the fuel for their entire existence. They understand that life isn't a long slog, punctuated by a few good days. Life is the pursuit of these moments of pure, unadulterated being. If you haven't had a peak experience in years, it's not because they stopped happening, it's because you've stopped looking up from the survival map in your hands. There is a dangerous trap in the self-help world: pseudo-actualization. This is when we act like an actualized person to gain social status. We buy the yoga gear, we post the deep quotes, and we adopt the aesthetic of growth. But Maslow was very clear. You cannot perform your way into being yourself. True growth is often messy, quiet, and completely invisible to others. It is the difference between neurotic needs and basic needs. A neurotic need is a bottomless pit, like the need for power or fame. No matter how much you get, it never feels like enough. A growth need, however, feels like opening a window. It brings fresh air into your psyche. It clarifies your vision. If your growth feels like a performance for an audience, it's likely just a sophisticated D need. You are still trying to fill a hole in your esteem layer. Actualization is unstaged. It is the natural result of being honest with yourself. It is the moment you realize that who you are is actually enough to work with. There is a quiet, polite tragedy that plays out in millions of living rooms every night. It's the tragedy of the good enough life. We don't fail spectacularly, we just fade away into the background of our own stories. Maslow once said, "If you deliberately plan on being less than you are capable of being, then I warn you that you'll be unhappy for the rest of your life." He wasn't being mean, he was stating a biological fact. When a bird refuses to fly, it doesn't just stay a bird, it becomes a frustrated, neurotic version of itself. Living small feels like wearing shoes that are 2 sizes too tight. Eventually, you stop noticing the pain, but you also stop walking very far. You begin to resent people who are doing it, the ones who took the risk you avoided. You call them lucky or obsessed to protect your own ego from the truth. The truth is that they simply decided that the pain of staying the same was greater than the pain of changing. Your potential is not a gift. It is a responsibility, and the cost of ignoring it is a life spent wondering, what if? So, how do you actually start actualizing today? So you don't need to quit your job or move to a cabin in the woods. The first step is a concept Maslow called self-choice. In every single moment, you have a choice between a safety choice and a growth choice. A safety choice is choosing the burger you always get because you know it's fine. A growth choice is trying the thing that scares you slightly. Next, practice desacralizing your fears. We often make our goals feel sacred and heavy, which makes us afraid to touch them. Treat your growth like an experiment, not a performance. Finally, identify your intrinsic mission. What is the one thing you would do if you knew for a fact you would never be famous for it? That is your be need. That is your compass. Self-actualization is not a mountain peak you reach and then retire. It is a way of walking. It is the commitment to being an active participant in your own evolution. Start by choosing growth, just once, in the next hour. The rest of the pyramid will take care of itself.